My girlfriend packed her things overnight and announced, "I can't live like this right now. I need time to think." This happened immediately after I lost my job and lost almost all my savings due to the collapse of my firm. I rebuilt my life from scratch, and then she showed up again, as if nothing had happened. Until recently, I, a 34-year-old man, had a fairly stable life. I held the position of director of strategy at a large private investment company. A big title, endless dinners with clients, corporate retreats, everything as expected. I had a corner office, a huge salary, a share in the business, and bonuses the size of which resembled phone numbers. I wasn't fabulously rich, but in restaurants, I never looked at prices. I had been dating Daniel for 2.5 years. She is 30, beautiful, smart, worked in marketing, although she often changed jobs. She never stayed in one job longer than a year, but I didn't judge her. My income was quite enough for both of us. Daniel constantly insisted that money was not important to her. She repeated this so often, as if trying to convince herself. Once in Cabo, when I jokingly mentioned early retirement and moving to the middle of nowhere, she said she was ready to live with me even in a cardboard box. It seemed sweet to me then. I thought she was different. It turned out I was wrong. About 4 months ago, my world turned upside down. The investment company I had helped grow for the past 7 years suddenly collapsed. And it wasn't a regular layoff due to a couple of bad deals. A real corporate catastrophe happened. Several partners were caught in dubious, almost criminal operations. Everything fell apart instantly. Investors pulled their money, clients fled, and words like fraud and lawsuit appeared in the headlines. The board of directors just shut everything down. One week we were discussing a winter vacation resort, and the next I was sitting in the office with an HR representative signing non-disclosure documents. I was left without a job, without severance, without anything at all. Since most of my funds were tied up in the firm's stock, I also lost almost all my personal savings. That was my mistake. I should not have forgotten about diversification. Rich Blake very quickly turned into Blake, who was forced to count every cent. I tried to figure out how long my remaining money would last. I had a separate account, so starvation wasn't threatening me. But the rent for a luxury apartment, the lease on an expensive car, and credit card debt required huge amounts. The money was disappearing every week. That same evening, I sat Daniel down in the kitchen and honestly told her everything. I explained that the company was gone, finances were running out, and I would need time to get back on my feet. I warned that it would be tough, but I would definitely manage. She looked at me as if she didn't understand the meaning of the words. Then she asked, "So, you're basically bankrupt now?" I confirmed that things were bad. She just nodded. No hugs, no words of support like, "We'll figure it out." Just silence. I tried to joke, remembering her words about living in a box. She barely smiled and said she needed to think. All evening she sat silently on her phone and went to bed very early, citing fatigue. In the morning, I saw her suitcases by the door. It wasn't a joke. 2 large bags and a travel duffel stood as if she was going to the airport. Daniel was standing in the kitchen with coffee and a bag over her shoulder. When I asked what was happening, she answered without a trace of guilt. "Sorry, Blake, this is too much for me. I need space to think things over. I didn't sign up for this." And that was it. She didn't promise to call or come back later. She just stated that she couldn't be with me right now. I didn't yell or beg her to stay. I just stood in my underwear and watched her leave, as if I were a mistakenly delivered order she no longer needed. Silence fell in the apartment. Her cosmetics and ringing laugh disappeared. It was worse than any fight. She was gone for several days. At first, I hoped for a call, but deep down I understood. She was there while everything was good, and she ran away as soon as the troubles began. After she left, I sat for hours in the dark in front of the turned-off TV. My brain refused to believe what was happening. The house became dead. The music, the footsteps in the bathroom, even the smell of her diffuser that always calmed me, all gone. I felt not anger, but deep shame for having believed the illusion. I began to remember moments that I hadn't paid attention to before. My gaze fell on the blanket she always used. It was still lying on the armrest of the chair. I remembered how we dreamed of the future. I told her that if everything collapsed, I would open a food truck to stay afloat. She laughed and only asked me not to make tacos because everyone makes them. Now I doubt whether she would have stayed with me if I really were selling burgers from a truck. There was another evening when I came home from work completely exhausted. She lit candles, made pasta, and put on my old t-shirt. She kissed me and said that this, us, was the most important thing we had, no matter what happened in life. I believed her then, but now I realize that that evening happened right after I received a huge bonus. She casually asked about the check amount while we were doing chores around the house. At the time, I took it as ordinary conversation, but maybe it wasn't. Sitting in the dark, I revisited my memories with new subtitles. It was like a movie you thought was a romantic comedy, but it turned out to be a drama about a well-planned escape plan. I remembered how once on a Tuesday, we were walking through a furniture store. She saw a coffee table for $6,000 and said, "Someday, this will be the norm for us." Now I understand that she didn't mean us, but that I was supposed to provide that standard of living for her. And yet, despite these thoughts, part of me missed her. Not the girl who left in the morning, but the one who snuggled up to me on Sundays and made fun of my playlists. The one who drove 40 minutes across town to bring me my forgotten laptop before an important meeting. The problem is, that version of Daniel probably never existed. She loved me when life was shiny and easy, when any decision brought profit. But as soon as it became uncomfortable, she just disappeared without a word. I thought we were truly close, and she didn't need mountains of gold to be happy. But she wasn't built for hardship. She was only there for comfort, and as soon as the comfort ended, she left too. I fell silent for a long time. I didn't post anything and didn't talk to anyone. It was hard for me to explain the situation to friends without feeling pathetic. My life turned from clearly structured into a kind of blurry emptiness in just 48 hours. Only after 3 days did I decide to call my parents. Not out of fear, but because this conversation made everything finally real. Besides, they never got along with Daniel. Mom tried to be polite, but she wasn't good at it, and Dad just avoided interacting with her. Every time we visited, he suddenly found things to do in the garden or fix something in the attic, although he hates housework. That was a warning sign that I stubbornly ignored. I dialed the number on a Sunday afternoon. Mom answered almost immediately. I didn't sugarcoat anything and said directly, "The company is gone. Daniel left." After a long pause, I heard her breath catch. "Oh, Blake," she said quietly, and her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry, son." I felt that she genuinely empathized with me. She saw how hard it was for me and knew I was holding on by a thread. Then she added a little more quietly, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, at least one of those losses is permanent." That was her way of trying to make me smile, although there was still sadness in her voice. She wasn't even angry at Daniel. She was just sad that I was going through this alone. My father, who had been listening on speakerphone, added, "Son, I'm sorry about your job, but I've been waiting for the day when you finally saw that woman's true face." They weren't being smug, just direct. That's their nature. Mom asked if I needed to come home for a while, or if they should fly to me. I declined both offers, but it meant a lot to me. I wasn't used to being the one who needed support. I had always been considered the child who was doing great, that son whose successes were talked about at family dinners. I was struck by how understanding they were. They never asked if I had seen this coming, nor did they say the phrase, "I told you so." Instead, my parents offered to pay my bills for a few months. I refused, but they insisted on helping with groceries and gas until my situation stabilized. I accepted that part. It was hard to swallow my pride, but it helped me stay afloat. They also made it clear that Daniel would never again set foot in their house, even if she tried to act nice again. Only then did I realize how well they had seen her true nature. Mom mentioned little details that Daniel had said when I wasn't around. She casually asked about family investments, asked if I had any brothers or sisters, whether I would receive any inheritance. Mom didn't think much of it at the time, but admitted that it always gave her an unpleasant feeling. She looked at me as an opportunity. Those words stuck in my memory. Over the next couple of weeks, my parents became my reset button. I called them almost every day. They didn't give fake motivational speeches or sprinkle cliched quotes. They just listened. They said I wasn't the only one who had faced such blows of fate. Dad told me how in the early 90s he almost lost his plumbing business. He said he was ruined and on the verge of depression for a whole year before things turned around. I never knew that before. It made me realize how much I still had. Yes, I lost my position, salary, and savings, but I wasn't starting from absolute zero. I had experience, I had connections, I had parents who remained on my side. And although I was emotionally broken, I wasn't completely alone. The next step was figuring out what to do next. For a few days, I just wrote down ideas. not startup concepts or unicorn apps, but real things. What am I good at? Which acquaintances will still answer my call? What can I do with low overhead that would bring a steady income? I started calling old contacts, people I had worked with on deals, clients who had relied on my forecasts, small companies I had helped with restructuring when I was still at the firm. Most of them were polite. Some suggested lunch sometime, and a couple of people turned out to be real friends. They gave me actual work, mostly consulting gigs. One person needed help revising a financial strategy for a startup he was trying to repurpose. Another wanted to analyze market risks for a new expansion region. It wasn't prestigious, but it brought in money. It reminded me that I actually had knowledge. I wasn't just a guy with a business card and a suit. I had value beyond my job title. My apartment turned into an office. I sold some unnecessary things bought over the years. Custom sneakers, a watch I wore twice, a gaming chair I didn't need. I used that cash to pay off credit card debt and lower my monthly expenses. I also changed my car. I switched from leasing a luxury car to buying a used sedan. It was humbling, but at the same time, it gave me freedom. I stopped pretending. To those who asked, I said I had lost everything, that I was recovering, that Daniel had left and I had no plans to take her back. People respected that. It's amazing how much easier conversations become when you're not pretending. At some point, I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but better. I was tired from actually doing things, not just being anxious all night. I made a calendar, set aside hours for work, food, and rest. It helped. Structure was returning slowly, but it was returning. Daniel never called or texted. No thinking of you or apologies for disappearing. She just left, which, honestly, made things easier. I didn't have to doubt anything. She made her choice, and I finally started making mine. One of those decisions was to never let someone like that get so close again. I wasn't going to turn into a bitter, closed-off shell of a person. But I was done with fair-weather love that only shows up when everything is shiny. My parents kept checking in on me, and although they didn't say it directly, I could see they were proud of how I was handling it. As an adult man, not hiding under the covers for weeks. Mom even sent me lasagna and cookies with a note. "You're still our rock star. It's just that right now you're a rock star in sweatpants." That made me laugh harder than anything in weeks. I wasn't back to my old self yet, but I was on my way. The first few projects I got weren't status symbols at all. One was for a mid-sized logistics company that needed to figure out why they were losing money every quarter. Another was for a small real estate team that had no idea how to allocate capital during a market slowdown. Most of the work wasn't glamorous. I was no longer making billion-dollar deals or riding in a black car to client dinners. I was checking spreadsheets in sweatpants and drinking microwaved coffee. But I was moving again, and that was the main thing. What surprised me was how much I actually enjoyed the process. Don't get me wrong, I missed the salary. I missed the ridiculous steakhouse dinners, the trips, the bonuses. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that what I was doing belonged to me. By the third month, more calls were coming in. Word got around that I was now working for myself, and small firms that couldn't afford my old firm's rates suddenly started reaching out to me. I wasn't charging crazy amounts, but I was earning enough to breathe. Not just survive, but actually breathe. The income wasn't stable yet, but things were changing. That's when I decided to get serious about it. I gave it a name, Braden Strategy Group. Nothing flashy, just my middle name on a logo. I registered an LLC, opened a business account, paid a freelancing student to design a website that didn't look like it was made in 2004, and started getting things in order like a real company. I even ordered business cards, although I knew I probably wouldn't hand any out. What shocked me the most was that I didn't miss the firm. Yes, there were moments when thoughts of what if would come over me. What if I had quit before the collapse? What if I had left earlier and taken one of those offers I turned down out of loyalty? But the deeper I got into my own business, the more I realized I liked being in control. I didn't have to fake smile at client dinners or pretend to be impressed by people who interrupt everyone in meetings. I could choose who to work with, and that part was priceless. My parents supported me from day one. Mom kept calling it my new venture and asking about margins and customer retention models, as if she had been studying it in her free time. Dad even offered to build me a proper desk when he came to visit. I declined because I didn't want to feel like I was leaning on them too much, but it meant a lot. Every conversation with them felt more hopeful. It no longer seemed like, "How's our broken son doing?" but rather, "Damn, he's fixing it." After a month, something changed. I stopped feeling like a man picking up the pieces and started realizing I was building an entirely new house. My clients were no longer temporary gigs. They were coming back with new problems. One of them even referred me to a competitor, which seems incredible given that at the firm I had spent years trying to earn such loyalty. The money still wasn't stunning, but it was enough to slightly replenish my savings, pay the rent without checking the balance twice, and even start looking at a small office space to get out of the apartment. The funniest thing was that in this cramped space with one window and a cheap chair, I was happier than I had ever been in my old corner office. I didn't have a fake view or an espresso machine, but I had peace, and peace is not issued with a corporate badge. At some point, I started hearing rumors about what Daniel was up to. Mutual friends reached out. Nothing dramatic, just casual conversations where her name came up. Apparently, she had moved back in with her sister, was piecing together freelance work, and had started seeing a therapist, which, honestly, is good for her. I didn't feel bitterness, I just didn't care anymore. Her story and mine had completely diverged. I realized I was healing not because of some epiphany. It showed in the little things. I stopped checking her social media. I no longer replayed that last morning in my head. I could go to the grocery store and not feel strange walking past the bakery section she loved. I could sleep through the night without wondering if I should have said more or done things differently. Then something happened that sealed everything for good. A friend of a friend, a guy I'd met years ago at some event and barely remembered, sent me a message on a professional social network. He said he ran a small local business podcast and wanted to interview people who had been through major changes. At first, I almost ignored it. I thought it was just another offer to work for exposure or an attempt to create content from other people's stories. But something about the moment made me stop. I wasn't rich again, not even close, but I had survived the storm, stood on my feet, and built something real from scraps and my own perseverance. So, I decided to agree. The host was calm, with a laid-back expert style. He started simple. He asked about my old job, the collapse, what I felt when everything fell apart. I answered honestly. I told him that the first few weeks after losing the firm, I just sat in silence, wondering where I had gone so wrong. Then he asked a question that stuck with me. When did you stop feeling like you were just surviving and start feeling like you were recovering? I didn't have a prepared answer. I paused, and then I just said, probably the day I stopped asking, why me, and started asking, what now? He nodded as if that was something profound. I didn't even realize it was a good line until the episode aired. I thought maybe a handful of people would listen to it, some entrepreneurs on their way to work, or a guy cleaning out his garage. Nothing special. But then my inbox started blowing up. First, an email came from a guy in a financial firm who said, I heard you on the podcast. I need help with our budget model. Can you consult? Then a VP of marketing wrote that her startup needed a part-time strategist, and she liked that I spoke like a real person, not a template expert. By the end of the week, I had 6 serious inquiries, 3 of which turned into paid jobs. One guy even told me, the part where you talked about your girlfriend leaving the next morning hit me hard. Mine left when I lost the lease on my barbershop last year. I thought I was the only one. That's when it hit me. This was no longer just hustling. It wasn't leftovers or attempts to figure things out. I was building a name, not because I had an old title or an expensive watch in my profile picture, but because people heard my honest story and trusted me. That interview was the moment I stopped being the guy picking up the pieces and became the guy people call when their own walls start cracking. It didn't just bring clients, it brought back my confidence. And then, just as I was closing a deal that promised to triple my monthly income, there was a knock at the door, a sound I hadn't heard in almost 5 months. The knocks were quiet, not hurried or heavy, but the timing of the visit seemed strange to me. I hadn't planned on receiving restaurant orders or mail that evening. I live in a secured building with an intercom, but sometimes the concierge lets visitors through if they're polite or convincingly pretend to be expected guests. I assumed it might be a neighbor or a salesperson. I opened the door and froze. Standing on the doorstep was Daniel. She looked different, but not in any way I might have imagined. There was no chaos in her appearance, nor her former shine. She seemed grounded. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back, a hoodie, and jeans. In her hands, she held a small umbrella dripping onto the mat, and she clutched a paper bag tightly to her chest, as if it contained the solution to all the world's problems. "Hey," she said, looking into my eyes as if we were characters in a reunion movie. I remained silent, just opened the door halfway, and crossed my arms over my chest. "I brought those cookies you used to love," she added hastily, holding out the bag as a peace offering. I didn't take it. "You showed up after 5 months with baked goods?" I asked in a flat voice. There was no rage in me, only deep fatigue from fake attempts to start over. She stepped into the hallway light and began talking about how she had done a lot of thinking about what happened and her actions. Daniel admitted that her disappearance was a mistake she regretted every day. According to her, at the time, she thought she was acting in her own best interest, but now she realized it was simply running away. She looked at me as if this belated explanation could make up for the long months of silence. I continued to stand still. "So why now?" I asked. She shifted from foot to foot and mentioned that she had seen my interview, heard the podcast, and visited the new company website. She said that I had achieved incredible things and that she was genuinely proud of me. And there it was, the real reason. She didn't come because she missed me during the quiet times. She showed up because my recovery plan had worked. She saw the results, my success, the numbers, the public recognition, and how the humble office had turned into something substantial. I reminded her that she hadn't been there when I was fending off debt collectors. She hadn't sent any messages when I was forced to sell my car or ask my parents for help with groceries. But now that things were looking up again, here she was. Tears glistened in her eyes, but I remained unmoved. She made excuses about fear and panic, claiming she didn't know how to handle the difficulties that had piled up. "You didn't even try," I cut in. That was the key difference. While I was in the very epicenter of the crisis, trying to survive and keep my head above water, she packed her things without even letting me finish my sentence. Daniel lowered her gaze to her hands and admitted to being selfish, saying she had only thought about what she wanted, not about our relationship, even though she claimed she never stopped thinking about me. "Daniel," I interrupted her, "there is no more us." The hallway had become cool, perhaps because the door was still slightly open. She was silent for about a minute, as if desperately trying to come up with a new plan not included in her rehearsed script. Finally, she asked for a second chance, to do things right this time. I answered with a short, "No." She blinked in confusion. I confirmed my decision with a nod, explaining that I had left that version of my life and our relationship in the past. I had become a different person since I let her into my life. When she called her action a single mistake, I disagreed. It was a conscious choice. She saw my fall and chose to leave. It wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was her final answer to my problems. She looked as if I had deprived her of the ability to breathe. At that moment, I remembered the oppressive emptiness of my apartment the day after she left. I remembered the messages I typed out but never sent. I remembered the meals I skipped because stress had twisted my stomach. That person had sat on that very couch and wondered how the woman he had trusted unconditionally could disappear without batting an eye. I stepped back, putting my hand on the doorknob. In a quiet voice, I said that I wasn't angry, but I no longer belonged to her. I didn't want her to have any illusions that her sudden appearance could change anything. She asked if we could at least keep in touch sometimes in the future, but I said no. Wishing her well, I closed the door. For a while, I just stood in silence. There was no excessive drama or pain, only absolute calm. An hour later, when I took out the trash, the bag of cookies was still in the hallway. I didn't bring it inside. That night, I didn't feel sad. The feeling was as if I had successfully passed an important test I hadn't even known about. Many people think the end of a relationship is always a warm moment with hugs and tears, after which healing begins. But sometimes, it's just the realization that you're no longer angry because it's truly over for you. A couple of weeks later, Mom called and said they were planning to throw a dinner in my honor. She emphasized that it would be a modest event for family and the few people who had truly supported me during the hardest time. At first, I tried to refuse, as I wasn't in the mood for speeches and handshakes, but Mom was insistent. And honestly, she was right. I had been so absorbed in the process of getting my affairs back in order that I hadn't taken the time to just stop, breathe, and appreciate the scale of what I had accomplished. The people who had stayed on my side when everything was falling apart deserved this evening too. We booked a cozy room in a small local restaurant where I had been going since childhood. No fuss. About 20 people gathered. My parents, a few cousins, Uncle Reggie, who, even though he was retired, still dressed as if his entire day was booked with important meetings. There were a few college friends I had recently reconnected with, and clients who had become close friends during the crisis. The atmosphere was relaxed. Everyone was smiling. My father started eating before the appetizers were taken away. Mom gave a short speech with no unnecessary sentimentality. She simply said how proud she was of me, and that I hadn't just recovered, but had outgrown my former self. Those words touched me more than I expected. Everything was going smoothly until we got to dessert. The front door opened, and Daniel appeared in the doorway. With flawless hair, in an elegant black dress, and holding a gift bag. She was smiling as if she were a welcome guest, as if she hadn't disappeared for 5 months and been refused at my apartment. The room fell instantly silent. I noticed my cousin's hand with a fork freeze in midair. Even the waiter paused while pouring coffee. She walked in as if she wasn't interrupting anyone, said hello to everyone, and apologized for being late, citing terrible traffic. Mom didn't even flinch. She just turned to me and whispered that I needed to handle this, or she would do it herself. I stood up and calmly, but very firmly said her name, reminding her that this was a private event. She gave a nervous laugh, pretending I was joking, although deep down she understood the seriousness of the situation. She stated that she had wanted to come anyway, because she had thought about it a lot, and didn't want to miss such an occasion. I asked what exactly she didn't want to miss. The moment when she pretends we are still close and nothing happened? As if I should just forget how she left the very second the problems became real. I said directly that she hadn't been invited, and she knew that perfectly well. Daniel blinked a few times and held out the gift to me, but I answered that I didn't want anything from her. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene, but my words were clearly audible to everyone present. She looked around for support, hoping that one of my aunts or cousins would smile and let her stay, but no one moved, not a single person. My father just cleared his throat, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her with an expression that silently asked, "Why are you still here?" Daniel's face froze. The fake smile disappeared. She stood in silence for a few seconds, then tried again to talk about how she was working on herself, and realized she was wrong. I interrupted her, saying that she had no right to barge into my life, now that all the pieces of the mosaic had come back together. She clutched the bag tighter. She again called her departure a mistake, but I repeated, it was her choice. I didn't ask her to leave. There was no need. The silence said it all for me. She slowly turned around and left. The sound of her heels on the wooden floor echoed through the room. It didn't seem like a cinematic ending. It looked desperate and flat, like an attempt to rewind a tape that had long since broken. When the door closed behind her, no one applauded or shouted. Everyone just went back to their plates, as if a system glitch had been fixed and work had resumed. Mom leaned toward me again and handed me a glass of water, praising my composure and adding that she would have thrown her purse out after her. That made me laugh more genuinely than usual. Later, as we were getting ready to leave, Uncle Reggie pulled me aside. He's a man of few words, a former military man with a classic stoic face. He simply said that some people only show up when the lights come back on in the house, and he praised me for not letting them back in. I nodded silently. That feeling of finality and peace had settled in my chest. Daniel didn't write or try to meet again. Maybe she finally understood, or maybe not. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had plenty of chances to give in to guilt or memories and lower my standards, but I didn't. That evening wasn't about revenge or the desire to flaunt my success. It was about being surrounded by people to whom I mattered as a person, not because of status or money. And that is the true wealth that cannot simply be thrown away.